Yeah, I think that, any patient that truly, or, elderly individual or someone that has dementia, they can find some moments of clarity, right? They can find moments throughout the day that they have energy. And I think that Trump's team should not underestimate Joe Biden and his team's ability to whether they're going to jack him up on Mountain Dew or whatever it is. That, look, the State of the Union this year, he had a lot of energy for about an hour or an hour and a half. But it doesn't mean, what we're seeing is obviously throughout the day, he can't carry that level of energy.
Okay, so what's so amazing about that, Willie, is that jacked up on Mountain Dew theory did not come from some guy they picked up off the street, right? That was like rolling dice against the side of a wall or something. I'm sitting there halfway through going, who is this guy? He is an elected member of Congress who is on the House Oversight Committee.
Wow.
And he is talking about people being jacked up on Mountain Dew. And they better be careful because, even old, elderly people can be good every once in a while. And
hop up out of the coffin.
They can just hop up and suddenly turn around, and suddenly you have the largest NATO alliance in world history, and you have the best jobs numbers in 50 years.
That can happen too.
They can take a swig of Mountain Dew one moment, the next moment the dollar could be at a 50-year high.
Yeah.
They could just, and on and on and on.
And pass more legislation than any other president in modern history.
Who knows? Maybe they accidentally snort some of that Mountain Dew up because they're so old it's coming out of their nose. And that gives them the inspiration. And they say to themselves, hey, I may be completely out of it, but I'm going to do something that none of the preceding 5 presidents of the United States did. I'm going to put together more bipartisan legislation than any president since LBJ. That's what I'm going to do.
And lower the cost of diabetes medicine. Why not? I just woke up and did that.
Willie, I mean, this is desperation. And like you say, this shows how nervous they are. This is not how somebody who's confident acts. I never heard Larry Bird talking about it. Magic Johnson's probably going to be jacked up on Mountain Dew. We're not going to be able to beat the Lakers because, no. Trump is, I can't believe I'm saying this. Trump is scared out of his mind. He's whining and whimpering because Joe Biden may just beat him really badly. I mean, I don't know. You tell me, why are they running so scared from Joe Biden, a guy who they've spent the last 8 years saying is out of his mind?
First of all, I love a Mountain Dew, have for a very long time. It's a safe and legal way to keep yourself jacked up if you're studying for a test in college or something like that. It's fantastic. I mean, it really is remarkable that this is the entire argument. We saw it. We're going to play more of it again. You heard a little of it from Speaker Johnson, sort of dabbling in it yesterday as well, saying, we're expecting Joe Biden to do well, is what they're saying to the public, and we need a reason why he did well, whether it's Mountain Dew or much worse, as President Trump and others have suggested, some kind of a drug that he might be on. They watched the State of the Union address. They were frankly surprised by how good he was, how energetic he was, how strong he was, and they needed some way to explain it away. So now here we are ahead of the debate. You have just, again, we talk about split screens a lot. You have the President of the United States at Camp David preparing for this debate, how to handle Donald Trump, how to talk through the issues and his accomplishments. And on the other side of it, Jonathan Lemire, you have a camp that is talking almost exclusively about cocaine, about Mountain Dew, and about how the debate moderators are on the side of the President of the United States. Again, that doesn't feel like a winning hand going into this.
First of all, I'm rethinking my morning beverage choice here. If this was Mountain Dew, think about what I could do this morning. We'll switch that for tomorrow.
Do the Dew.
We'll switch that for tomorrow. You're right. We haven't seen President Biden in several days. We know he's been at Camp David with a couple of dozen aides, holding full-on mock debate rehearsals. Bob Bauer, his attorney, stepping in, playing the role of Donald Trump, hammering through the issues. Donald Trump, meanwhile, is floating conspiracy theories. Last night, appearing on Newsmax with being interviewed by his former campaign manager. And his team says, well, that's how Trump's preparing. He's doing these hostile interviews. including on Newsmax with his former campaign manager, who opened the interview by saying, I'm honored to say I'm going to be with Donald Trump in Atlanta at the debate tomorrow night. So there's that. And we should note, Newsmax had to run a disclaimer saying they accept the results of the 2020 election, even though Donald Trump wouldn't say that because they don't want to get further sued.
Billion-dollar lawsuits have a way of doing that.
Billion-dollar lawsuits have a way of changing the chyron on the bottom of your screen. What you're seeing there, this is Corey Lewandowski saying how proud he is he's going to be with Donald Trump in Atlanta tomorrow. But this is what we see, is that Trump is saying he's not preparing. We know he's talked to some aides, but he's not doing full-on rehearsals. But there does seem to be a real lack of confidence being put out here in the last minute by these Republicans.
Why are they so scared?
Who now are acknowledging, hey, Joe Biden's going to be really good at this. He clearly, because he's hopped up on some sort of substance, even if it's just an overly caffeinated beverage. And they're trying to lower expectations. And it seems like they're anticipating Trump to go out there tomorrow and repeat what he did in 2020, which was to get badly beaten by Joe Biden.
So, guys, I mentioned House Speaker Mike Johnson talking about all of this yesterday. He sort of pushed aside the drugs, the harder stuff, but he stayed on the narrative.
Look, there's a lot of things that are said in jest. Of course, no one expects that Joe Biden would be on cocaine, but they do ask questions, and I think they're objectively. I mean, I think it makes sense why people are asking, will he be on some sort of energy drinks or something? Okay, look, his energy levels, you can see, vary depending on what format he's in and what forum, and you know, we expect that he'll do what he did at the State of the Union. He had a lot of energy that night, so that's the Joe Biden I expect to see. The question is, can he stay for 90 minutes on that stage and go toe-to-toe with President Trump, who, as you know, goes to rallies and talks for 2 hours on end without any break and any notes. So it'll be a very interesting thing to see.
Yeah.
He does, and he wanders wildly about, and he says he's afraid World War II is going to start, and he says that Barack Obama is president of the United States, and he talks about sharks, and
batteries.
He talks about if I'm in a boat that has an electric motor, and by the way, we've been in one. You're okay, Donnie.
Drip, drip,
So
drip, showers, lather.
Washing machines, So, he does stay there for about 90 minutes longer than he should. It doesn't go well. But Mike Johnson right there saying, well, maybe not cocaine, but maybe some BC powders and some RC cola. I mean, come on. Look, what's wrong with them?
Look, obviously they kind of, overshot the runway on this old age thing, and it could end up biting them. Who knows what will happen? Anything can happen on the debate stage. But we now know Donald Trump. We have seen Donald Trump in all sorts of different challenging positions, including at press conferences, on the world stage, where he left a mess. Let's just put it there. And in terms of debates or one-on-one interviews, town halls, he also tries to game the system. He tries to get into the heads of the moderators, and those with less experience, he actually succeeds.
Runs over them.
They're going out. Yeah, he runs right over them and basically takes an hour for himself to talk to America about batteries or whatever else he wants to. So there is that. And I think going after the moderators in this case, which is another collective effort by the Trump campaign and Trump himself, is to try and set up the moderators to feel like they have to overcorrect on fairness.
Already playing the
I don't think that will happen with these.
Nope.
I think they know what they're dealing with.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.